even look at what he chose to eat, we have to look at the very alarming biological reality that quite often he simply refused to eat at all.
Right, and according to his mother, Katherine Jackson, this wasn't some eccentric habit he picked up when he became the king of
Oh,
pop.
no, not at all.
She wrote about this in her book, sharing this memory of family outings when he was just a little kid. They would go out for hot fudge sundaes, right? And all the other siblings would be thrilled, just diving into these massive desserts.
Like grandma kids do.
Exactly. But Michael would just sit there, cross his arms, and say, I'm not hungry.
Mm.
Catherine noted that she and Latoya would sometimes eat 2 sundaes a day, and she just couldn't fathom what kind of kid turns down a hot fudge sundae.
Which really points to a very early behavioral pattern. Turning down a high-value treat like a sundae in a chaotic, crowded household isn't just about appetite. It is an early assertion of a boundary.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, but as the sources show, what started as a childhood disinterest evolved into a deeply concerning, severe physical crisis as the pressure of global fame really started to
Yeah,
mount.
it got so dangerous.
It did. In a 2005 interview with Jesse Jackson, Michael himself actually admitted that whenever he experienced high emotional stress, his immediate physiological response was just to stop eating entirely, sometimes fasting until he physically collapsed and was rendered unconscious.
Wait, unconscious? That detail literally stopped me in my tracks when I read it. We were talking about the body completely shutting down because the fuel tank is just bone dry.
Exactly. It's terrifying.
And the sources point out that this wasn't purely a stress response either. It was driven by
Huh.
this intense, almost spiritual desire for physical purity. Like in a 1982 interview with Interview magazine, he openly discussed his habit of fasting every single Sunday.
Right, the juice fast.
Yeah, he would consume absolutely nothing but juices, and his reasoning was highly visceral. He stated it was to clean out the sewer valve of the system. He genuinely viewed the human body as a vessel that constantly accumulated toxic sludge, and he believed total deprivation was the only way to purge it.
To understand the danger there, you really have to look at the physical mechanics of what his body was actually doing while he was starving it. I mean, according to Catherine's accounts, during these intense juice fasts, he wasn't meditating quietly in a dark room.
He was working.
He was aggressively dancing nonstop for 2 solid hours on a portable dance floor he kept with him.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. When you do that on 0 calories, your blood sugar plummets, your glycogen stores are entirely depleted, and your brain is just starved of the glucose it needs just to keep the lights on.
It's like owning a Formula One car, you know? You have this incredible multi-million-dollar high-performance machine, but you refuse to put gas in it because you want the engine to remain perfectly mathematically pure, even if it means you're going to just stall out and crash in the middle of the track.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the psychology behind that Formula One car analogy makes perfect sense. Look at the environment he existed in.
Total chaos.
Exactly. From childhood, every single aspect of his existence was commodified. His schedule, his public appearances, his creative output, his sleep schedule, everything was relentlessly managed by publicists, lawyers, and massive corporate record labels.
So he had no say in his own life.
Barely any. And when you exist inside a machine like that, food intake becomes the ultimate, unassailable domain of personal control. They can make you record a song, they can force you onto a stage, but nobody can force you to swallow.
Wow. But the engine did inevitably stall. The physical toll detailed in these biographies is devastating. I mean, by the time of the Victory Tour in 1984, he was suffering from extreme exhaustion and dangerous dehydration.
And it only got worse from there.
Yeah, the sources indicate this escalated dramatically. Former Sony executives Corey Rooney and Chris Apostle recounted this deeply disturbing conversation around the Invincible era. Michael flat out told them he couldn't physically tour anymore. He looked at them and said, "Because it will kill me."
Because the preparation for those tours required a level of physical discipline that had just warped into complete self-destruction. He explained to those executives that preparing for a tour meant deliberately dehydrating himself.
Which is so backwards.
Totally backwards. He wouldn't eat, he wouldn't drink, he wouldn't sleep. The anxiety of performance entirely overrode his biological survival signals. He even told them, "They made me walk with an IV last time." He was literally tethered to a medical drip just to remain upright.
So we have a massive multi-million-dollar crisis on our hands. The biggest star on the planet is running on fumes, and the entire corporate ecosystem surrounding him is panicking, which naturally leads to the interventions.
Right, because you have to do something.
Exactly. You can't have a global stadium tour collapsing because the star won't ingest calories. They had to bring in outside forces to somehow trick a global icon into eating.
And the first intervention naturally came from his family. During a visit home, Katherine Jackson saw how dangerously thin and lethargic he was, and she decided to deploy a mother's ultimate weapon, which is home cooking. She made him fried pizzas.
Fried pizzas, which sounds absolutely incredible, but listener, think about this for a second. Think about how you feel after eating 4 thick, heavy slices of deep fried pizza. All you want to do is lie on the couch.
Yeah, you're not moving after that.
Now imagine eating that and then having to go out and moonwalk with absolute precision in front of 80,000 screaming fans 30 minutes later.
It was a complete disaster. He loved the pizzas, but because he was so starved, he vastly overate. The heavy, greasy food left him incredibly sluggish, and he had a terrible time trying to perform the next day.
So the mom approach didn't work.
No, the strategy of using heavy comfort food completely backfired. The machine needed a much more calibrated professional strategy.
Well, I want to pause here because I'm looking at this note from the sources about the Thriller era, and I'm honestly confused. Why is legendary record producer Quincy Jones suddenly moonlighting as Michael Jackson's dietary manager?
Because Quincy Jones recognized that an artist who refuses to eat is a massive liability to the creative process. I mean, Quincy wanted to produce Michael, but every time he invited him over to his home to work, Michael wouldn't touch a single bite of food.
He was probably fasting again.
Exactly. Quincy realized he had to solve the physiological problem before he could solve the musical one. So he brings in a Brazilian chef named Dona Remy Villarreal.
And her story is straight out of a movie.
It really is. She took a completely different approach. She pulled Michael aside and promised him healthy, all-natural vegetarian Brazilian food. She prepared black beans, collard greens, and farofa.
What's farofa?
It's a traditional Brazilian dish made of toasted cassava flour, and it's known for having a really satisfying, savory crunch, and the result of giving him flavorful, textured, healthy food. He ate 4 full plates.
4 plates, that's amazing.
Quincy Jones was so relieved he was reportedly kissing her all night in gratitude.
But her involvement didn't stop at dinner parties. Your sources detail this unbelievable moment later on. Chef Remy is living in a small apartment in Los Angeles. She's in her cleaning clothes, tending to her daily life, when suddenly a stretch limousine just pulls up to her building.
Just out of nowhere.
Yeah. The handlers inside tell her to get in immediately. They don't care that she's not packed. They don't care what she's wearing. They rush her to a Beverly Hills penthouse, shove an airline ticket to Alabama into her hands, and tell her, "You are leaving right now."
Because the tour was on the brink of collapse, Michael was refusing to go on stage. The stress of the tour was manifesting as severe, crippling stomach aches, and he demanded that Remy be flown out instantly to be his personal nutritionist.
That is wild. They basically kidnapped her.
The executives were terrified of losing millions of dollars in canceled arena shows, so they didn't hesitate. They kidnapped a chef in a limousine, and she went to Alabama, and she actually cured the stomach aches simply by cooking him fresh, digestible food that he felt safe eating.
But even with a rotating cast of world-class personal chefs, they were dealing with a massive paradox. The biographies note that for years, Michael adhered to a strict vegetarian diet, initially starting it to cure his severe acne and maintaining it for holistic health.
He was deeply committed to a macrobiotic lifestyle.
Right. But here's the massive problem. He absolutely despised the taste of vegetables.
Which is a culinary nightmare for a chef. I mean, for context, a macrobiotic diet is heavily dependent on organic, locally grown vegetables, whole grains, seaweeds, and legumes.
So basically all vegetables.
Yeah, it is the absolute opposite of the standard American diet. It avoids toxins, processed sugars, and most animal products. Yeah.
So how on earth do you feed a strict macrobiotic vegetarian who hates vegetables? Enter Chef Maninal, who was hired straight out of LA's Golden Temple restaurant. He realized he had to treat his incredibly powerful boss like a picky toddler.
It's so true.
His ultimate workaround was a custom eggplant and shiitake mushroom pizza. He literally had to puree and disguise the vegetables in the sauce and the toppings so Michael wouldn't know he was eating them.
What's fascinating here is the stark contrast it creates between his public persona and his private reality. Publicly, Michael Jackson was presented as a being of ultimate, untouchable discipline.
Right, the military precision of his dancing.
His notorious perfectionism in the recording studio, I mean, he seemed superhuman. But privately, his reality was deeply vulnerable and relatable. He simply didn't like the taste of healthy food and required a highly paid professional to sneak vegetables into his dinner.
It grounds him in such a surprising way. But getting him to eat vegetables was really only half the battle.
Yeah.
Once the chefs established a baseline of nutrition, they had to navigate his intense cravings for comfort.
And that wasn't easy.
No, because this is where his need for control clashes with his need for relief. He wanted comforting, flavorful food, but he demanded it fit within these impossibly strict macrobiotic boundaries.
Chef Manny Nile really had to innovate during the grueling 5.5-month victory tour. Because Michael was burning thousands of calories on stage, he needed serious fuel. And one of his absolute fixations was New Mexico red chili enchiladas.
Obsession is probably a better word. The sources say Chef Nail actually had to pack massive bulk bags of this highly specific red chili powder to take on the tour. Michael wanted it almost every single day.
Every day.
Yeah, he had this smoky, spicy red chili sauce poured over everything. Enchiladas, nachos, potato skins. It makes you wonder, and when your daily life is so rigidly controlled and somewhat numb to normal human experiences, maybe you crave intense spice just to feel a physical sensation that isn't related to stress.
Sensation seeking is absolutely a part of it. But then came the challenge of his sweet tooth. Michael deeply craved sweets, but his purity mindset meant he had instituted a strict no-sugar rule.
That sounds miserable.
And to make it even more difficult for the chefs, he strongly disliked chocolate.
Which, if you think about it, eliminates about 90% of the dessert menu right out of the gate.
It really does.
Huh.
But Chef Nile found a brilliant workaround. He used natural maple syrup to bake these specific pecan cookies, which Michael playfully dubbed ookies. And he churned homemade honey vanilla ice cream.
And that ice cream brings us right back to the incredible story you opened the show with. Here's where it gets really interesting, because the context of that helicopter story makes it so much wilder.
I love this story.
So he was staying at the Disneyland Hotel in Anaheim. The hotel staff were entirely responsible for managing his meals, and somehow, amidst the chaos of his entourage, they misplaced his batch of homemade honey vanilla ice cream.
They lost the ice cream.
They lost it. And by the time they located it, it was completely melted. And instead of the hotel manager just apologizing and offering a substitute dessert, they quite literally chartered a private helicopter to fly to Los Angeles, pick up a freshly churned batch of this specific ice cream, and fly it back just for his dinner.
Unbelievable.
I have to pose this to you. Does extreme wealth and fame completely distort the very concept of a comfort food? I mean, when you can dispatch aviation resources to fetch a dessert, does it even provide comfort anymore?
It's a brilliant question. On the surface, the helicopter makes it look like an act of absurd, unchecked privilege, a total distortion of reality. But if you strip away the logistics and look at the item itself, a simple, unadorned bowl of vanilla ice cream, or the soup we're about to discuss, these are fundamentally humble, grounding foods.
That's a good point.
When your daily life involves being mobbed by thousands of hysterical fans, dealing with endless lawsuits, and generating millions of dollars a day for a corporate machine, a bowl of familiar ice cream represents a rare, tangible moment of predictability.
It's an anchor.
Exactly. It represents a longing for childhood simplicity in a life that has become horrifyingly complex.
He wasn't just searching for comfort in sugary sweets, though. He was looking for a literal time machine back to his childhood, which explains the strangest request in this entire stack of sources, and that's matzo ball soup.
Yes.
The sources detail the time he was living in Trump Tower, pushing himself to the absolute brink, finishing the history album. He had Chef Akasha Richmond, who cooked for him for 14 years, working with him. One day, he turns to her and asks for matzo ball soup,
Which she did not expect.
She was completely bewildered. She looked at the king of pop and asked, "What do you know from matzo ball soup?"
His answer strips away all the celebrity mystique, doesn't it? He simply told her, I grew up with a Jewish nanny. I love matzo ball soup. It was a direct, emotional tether to a comforting, nurturing presence from a time before he was the most famous man on earth.
Wow.
Though it is worth noting that he couldn't leave the recipe entirely traditional. Keeping with his desperate need for strong physical sensation, he had Chef Richmond heavily modify the broth, adding fresh jalapeno and cayenne pepper to satisfy his intense craving for spice.
A jalapeno matzo ball soup. I genuinely want to try making that. But listener, this brings us to what is easily the most shocking, whiplash-inducing pivot in this entire deep dive.
It really is a massive shift.
For years, as we've just laid out, we have the strict custom-made private chef, macrobiotic, sugar-free disguised vegetable era. He is treating his body like a heavily guarded temple. And then, as we move into the later years of his life in the early 2000s, the sources reveal an absolute obsession with the most mass-produced, chemically engineered comfort food on the planet, which is KFC.
The shift is jarring. It is heavily documented in the private flight log from 2003 that you provided. When he traveled, his rigidly enforced dietary rules just vanished. His preferred meal requested for breakfast, lunch, and dinner was Kentucky Fried Chicken.
I need to read this exact breakfast order out loud because the mechanics of it are wild. The logs show he ordered KFC original recipe chicken breasts, but he adamantly insisted that the fried skin be removed.
Right, for health.
Yeah, but he paired this with mashed potatoes, corn, biscuits, strawberry jelly, and heavily processed spray butter for breakfast, served alongside scrambled eggs topped with more strawberry jelly and more spray butter.
Spray butter.
Think about the psychological gymnastics of removing the fried skin to be healthy, but then dousing everything in artificial spray butter.
And this wasn't just a quirk of air travel where his normal chefs weren't available either. Even at home, with a world-class private chef standing by in the kitchen, the siren song of KFC was too strong. The sources include a famously revealing story where he invited NBA legend Magic Johnson over for dinner.
Oh, right, and Michael goes out of his way to have his personal chef prepare this beautiful, macrobiotic-aligned, healthy grilled chicken dish specifically for Magic. But when it comes time to eat, what's Michael do? He completely ignores the private chef and has a giant, greasy bucket of KFC delivered just for himself.
That's hilarious.
But Magic Johnson, it turns out, was also secretly a huge fan of KFC. So they ditched the fancy meal, sat down, and shared the bucket of fried chicken together. Magic later called it one of the greatest, most normal moments of his life. And that shared bucket of chicken actually forged the bond that led to Magic agreeing to appear in the Remember the Time music video.
Now, since we are diving deeply into these 2003 flight logs, we do need to address a very fascinating fork in the road within the sources you provided.
Yes, this is crucial. Listener, your sources actually diverge here and give us two incredibly different narratives about what exactly was being consumed on those private flights. And we want to be clear, we aren't taking sides here, just reporting what the sources say. Author Aphrodite Jones claims in her analysis that these logs prove Michael was secretly disguising white wine inside Diet Coke cans.
Right.
And this was a specific claim that the prosecution aggressively weaponized against him during his 2005 trial.
But, looking at the exact same era, we also have the sworn testimony of the flight attendant, Cynthia Bell. She testified under oath that pouring the wine into soda cans was entirely her idea, not his, simply because he was a very private drinker who didn't want the flight crew scrutinizing him. Furthermore, she firmly denied ever witnessing any inappropriate or erratic behavior on those flights.
Exactly. We aren't here to pick a winner between these two historical accounts, but putting them side by side proves exactly why his relationship with consumption was so fraught. Every single sip of a beverage, every single bite of food was recorded, analyzed, and eventually entered into international court records.
It's a microscope.
When you are that heavily scrutinized, a bucket of mass-produced chicken in a private room might be the only time you actually feel invisible.
Returning to that shift to KFC, it really does demand analysis.
Well, I honestly have to push back on this timeline because I am struggling to reconcile these two distinct versions of the man. You have the my body is a temple, God's medicine only, macrobiotic guy in the 80s and 90s, fasting to clean his sewer valves. And then you have the guy eating KFC with spray butter for breakfast in the 2000s. From the outside, it feels like massive hypocrisy.
This raises an important question, though. Is it hypocrisy? Or is it simply the natural evolution of a human being slowly breaking down under unimaginable, crushing pressure? We have a cultural tendency to demand that our celebrities adhere to a single, rigid identity for their entire lives. If you enter the public eye as the healthy, disciplined vegetarian, society demands you remain that character forever.
But nobody's just one thing forever. You aren't the same person at 45 that you were at 25.
Precisely. People's psychological coping mechanisms change as their circumstances change. In the 80s and 90s, the macrobiotic diet and the intense fasting were coping mechanisms designed to maintain absolute control so he could perform at a superhuman, athletic level on those global tours.
Right, that was his armor.
But later in life, in the 2000s, the massive physical touring had largely stopped. The legal battles were mounting, the public scrutiny was vicious, his coping mechanisms shifted from seeking physical control to simply seeking emotional comfort.
And KFC gave him that.
Yes. KFC, As mass-produced and artificial as it is undeniably, aggressively comforting. It tastes exactly the same no matter where you are in the world. It provided a cheap, easy consistency that was entirely missing in his increasingly chaotic, terrifying public life.
So what you're saying is that the macrobiotic diet was his armor in the 80s when he needed to feel invincible, and the KFC was his security blanket in the 2000s when he just needed to survive the chaos.
Exactly. The food itself is just the symptom. The suffocating environment of absolute fame is the underlying cause.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today. Listener, you shared these incredible sources with us, and what we found by unpacking them was so much more profound than a list of celebrity recipes. These flight logs and chef interviews didn't just give us a grocery list.
No, they give us a psychological map.
A map of Michael Jackson's immense stress, his profound, desperate longing for normalcy and childhood safety, and his lifelong, incredibly complicated struggle to find fuel that didn't feel like a heavy burden.
From stubbornly refusing sundaes as a child, to dispatching helicopters for vanilla ice cream, from starving himself for purity to finding solace in a bucket of fried chicken. It is a deeply fragile, profoundly human story hidden behind a superstar facade.
So what does this all mean? It means that even for the most powerful, famous man in the world, the dinner plate is ultimately just a reflection of the soul's current state of survival. Which leaves me with a final thought for you to mull over as you go about your day.
I'm curious.
If your own daily food choices were meticulously recorded, analyzed, and read by strangers decades from now, what entirely contradictory stories would those meals tell about the different eras of your life? If extreme fame puts you in a fishbowl where every single bite is judged, maybe the real luxury isn't having a private chef or a chartered helicopter. Maybe the ultimate luxury is just getting to eat your spicy matzo ball soup in complete and total peace.